Picture the worst possible person to trust with the most important secret of the war. A convicted criminal, a safecracker, a man who had robbed banks across Europe for fun, who had been arrested by the British police, escaped from a Jersey prison, been arrested again by the Germans, and who by 1942 was sitting in a German prison on the island of Jersey with nothing but time and a very specific set of skills that the Abwehr, German military intelligence, had just decided were extremely useful. This is the man Britain chose to run as its most important double agent of the Second World War. His name was Chapman. And the story of what he did between 1942 and 1944 is the story of a man who was, by every conventional measure, completely untrustworthy, proven to be one of the most effective instruments of deception in the history of modern warfare. But before we get to what he did, you need to understand who he was, because of who explains the how. And the how is what makes this story different from every other spy story you have ever heard. Chapman was born in 1914 in Burnopfield, County Durham, in the northeast of England. He was the son of a pub landlord. He left school at 14. He joined the army at 17 and was discharged at 19 for going absent without leave. He then spent the following years doing what his particular combination of charm, intelligence, and complete moral flexibility made him suited for. He became a professional criminal, not a petty criminal, a specialist. Chapman had a talent for safecracking that the criminal fraternity recognized and that his own subsequent career demonstrated repeatedly. He was part of a gang called the Jelly Gang, named for the gelignite explosive they used to blow safes, and in the late 1930s this gang was responsible for a series of robberies across Britain that the police found difficult to solve because the work was technically accomplished and the perpetrators were careful. Chapman was also charming. This matters more than it might seem. The charm was not a performance. It was a genuine quality, the specific warmth and humor and interest in other people that makes a person immediately likable, and it operated on everyone who met him regardless of their background. Police officers who arrested him liked him. Prison wardens who guarded him liked him. Women who met him fell in love with him. German intelligence officers who recruited him trusted him completely. The charm was real. The loyalty that people assumed accompanied the charm was not. In 1939, Chapman was arrested in Edinburgh on safecracking charges. Before his trial, he fled to Jersey, the Channel Island. He was arrested there too, on separate charges. He was in a Jersey prison when Germany occupied the Channel Islands in 1940. He was now a British criminal in German-occupied territory with time to think about his options. His options were limited. He could serve his sentence under German occupation and hope for the best. He could try to escape, which was difficult from an island in the English Channel. Or he could do something that most people in his situation would not have considered. He could offer his services to the Germans. Chapman approached the German authorities and told them he wanted to work for them. He was British. He knew Britain. He had criminal skills that were militarily useful. He hated the British establishment, which was true enough in the specific sense that the British establishment had imprisoned him repeatedly. He was available. The Abwehr investigated him. They found a man whose criminal record confirmed exactly what he claimed about himself. They found a man who was clearly intelligent and clearly skilled. They found a man who expressed anti-British sentiments with a specific conviction of someone who had personal reasons for them. They recruited him. The training Chapman received at the Abwehr facility in Nantes was thorough. He learned Morse code. He learned to operate a radio transmitter. He learned the standard tradecraft of an intelligence agent, dead drops, recognition signals, coded communications, the operational security procedures that kept agents alive in hostile territory. He learned to use explosives in a more sophisticated way than the gelignite he had been using for safes. He was good at all of it. The same intelligence that made him an effective safecracker made him an effective trainee spy. He absorbed information quickly. He performed well in practical exercises. His instructors reported to Abwehr headquarters that he was one of the most capable agents they had trained. They gave him a mission.
He was to be parachuted into Britain. He was to make contact with his criminal network, which the Abwehr believed could provide him with safe houses and local assistance. He was to travel to Hatfield, Hertfordshire, where the de Havilland Aircraft Factory was producing Mosquito aircraft for the Royal Air Force. He was to blow up the factory's power generation system, which would shut down production. He was given a cover identity, money, a radio, and a parachute. On the night of December 16, 1942, Eddie Chapman jumped out of a German aircraft over the English countryside. He was supposed to find a safe house, establish contact with his criminal network, and prepare for the sabotage operation. Instead, he walked to the nearest police station and told them everything. Not because he had a sudden attack of conscience. Not because he had been secretly loyal to Britain all along. Because Eddie Chapman had looked at his situation with the cold calculation of a man who had survived by reading situations accurately, and he had concluded that working for British intelligence was a better deal than working for German intelligence. The calculation was not complex. Germany was losing the war by December 1942. Stalingrad was happening. The North Africa campaign was turning against the Axis. Chapman had been trained by the Abwehr well enough to understand the strategic picture, and the strategic picture told him that being on the German side in December 1942 was not where a man with options wanted to be. He had options. He was in Britain. Britain had an intelligence service. He had information about the Abwehr's operations, its personnel, its methods, its specific interest in the de Havilland factory. This information was valuable. Chapman was a man who understood value. He presented himself to MI5. The MI5 officer who conducted Chapman's initial debriefing was a man named Ronnie Reed. Reed was a former BBC engineer who had been recruited into MI5 at the beginning of the war and who had developed a talent for running double agents that his pre-war career had not predicted. Reed interviewed Chapman for days. He assessed what Chapman knew. He assessed what Chapman was. His assessment was that Chapman was genuinely intelligent, genuinely skilled, genuinely unreliable in the conventional sense, and genuinely useful in a way that conventional reliability could not produce. A reliable agent is predictable. A predictable agent is, from the perspective of the opposing intelligence service, eventually detectable. Chapman was unpredictable in his loyalties, but predictable in his self-interest. His self-interest was now aligned with Britain because Britain was the side that was likely to win. MI5 could work with that. Chapman was given the code name Zigzag. The name referred to his history of changing sides, his criminal career of moving between legitimate and illegitimate worlds, the specific quality of a man who could not be plotted on a straight line. The first operation Chapman was involved in was the sabotage of the de Havilland factory. Not actually sabotage. The appearance of sabotage. Chapman's Abwehr handlers expected him to blow up the factory's power generation system. If the factory was not blown up, they would suspect him. If the factory was blown up, Britain lost an aircraft factory. The solution was to make it look like the factory had been blown up without actually blowing it up. This is where the operation becomes extraordinary. MI5 contacted the de Havilland factory management and explained the situation. The factory's workers and managers were told that a controlled explosion was going to be staged in their facility. Special effects experts, including Jasper Maskelyne, a stage magician who had been recruited into military deception work, were brought in to create the appearance of a sabotaged transformer station. The transformer housing was painted to look damaged. Fake debris was scattered. The visible components of the power generation system were arranged to suggest catastrophic failure. From the air, the factory would appear to have suffered exactly the kind of damage that Chapman had been sent to cause. Chapman photographed the result and transmitted the photographs and a report to his Abwehr handlers via the radio the Germans had given him. The British also fed the story to German aerial reconnaissance. A German aircraft photographing the factory in the days after the supposed sabotage would see damage consistent with Chapman's report. The Abwehr received Chapman's report, received confirmation from aerial reconnaissance, and concluded that their agent had successfully completed his mission. The de Havilland factory was, in German intelligence records, a sabotage success. The factory continued producing Mosquito aircraft throughout the period. Chapman's handlers in the Abwehr were delighted. They had an agent who had succeeded in a difficult mission, who had demonstrated the tradecraft they had trained him in, and who had maintained his cover through the operation. They sent him enthusiastic communications. They sent him money. They began planning his extraction from Britain. Chapman was extracted via a neutral country. He made his way through contacts and routes that the Abwehr had provided, eventually reaching Lisbon and then being returned to German-controlled territory. He reported in person to his Abwehr handlers. He was debriefed extensively. He provided information about what he had observed in Britain, information that MI5 had carefully prepared for him to provide, accurate enough to be credible, misleading enough to be useful. He was treated as a hero. The Abwehr recommended him for the Iron Cross, Germany's highest military decoration. The decoration was awarded. Chapman received it from German military officials in a ceremony that MI5 monitored from a distance and found, in the understatement characteristic of British intelligence reports from the period, gratifying. Eddie Chapman, convicted British safecracker and double agent, was now a decorated German war hero. He was also, simultaneously, one of the most valuable assets that British intelligence possessed. The information that Chapman was able to provide MI5 during the periods when he was in direct contact with his Abwehr handlers was significant. He could report on Abwehr personnel, on their operational methods, on the specific questions they were asking him that revealed what German intelligence did and did not know about British defenses and production. The questions an intelligence service asks its agents are a map of what the intelligence service does not already know. Chapman's debriefings by the Abwehr, reported back to MI5, were a map of German intelligence gaps. Chapman was returned to Britain for a second mission in 1944. By this time, the double-cross system, the overall British program for controlling German agents in Britain, was in full operation, coordinating the activities of multiple turned agents to present Germany with a coherent false picture of British military dispositions. Chapman's second mission was to report on the effects of German V-1 flying bomb attacks on London. Germany was launching V-1s against London beginning in June 1944 and needed to know whether they were hitting their intended targets. The V-1 guidance system was imprecise, and the Abwehr relied on agents in Britain to report where the weapons were landing so that the launch parameters could be adjusted. If the agents reported accurately, Germany could adjust the V-1 trajectory to hit central London more effectively. If the agents reported inaccurately, Germany would adjust the trajectory in the wrong direction. Chapman reported that the V-1s were overshooting their targets and landing north of London. The actual impact pattern was that they were landing short in South London. Germany, believing Chapman's report, adjusted the trajectory southward. The adjusted trajectory caused subsequent V-1s to land short of their intended targets in a different way, further south, missing central London. The manipulation of the V-1 campaign through false agent reporting, including Chapman's contributions, is assessed by historians of the period to have moved a significant proportion of V-1 impacts away from the most densely populated central areas of London. The number of people whose lives were saved by this redirection cannot be precisely calculated. But the pattern of V-1 impacts during the campaign shows a distribution that is consistent with the agents having successfully shifted the targeting. Chapman was not the only agent involved in this manipulation. The double-cross system coordinated multiple agents to present a consistent false picture. But he was among the most trusted by the Abwehr, and his reports therefore carried significant weight in German targeting decisions. By the end of 1944, MI5 assessed that Chapman had reached the limit of his usefulness as an active double agent. The information he could provide was diminishing as the war moved toward its conclusion, and the specific intelligence questions that had made him valuable became less pressing. He was also a man whose complicated personal life, his romantic relationships, his drinking, his gambling, the general unpredictability that was his defining characteristic, was becoming increasingly difficult for his MI5 handlers to manage. He was stood down. Not exposed, not imprisoned, not punished. Simply no longer actively run as an agent. The Abwehr, to the end of the war, believed Eddie Chapman was their most successful agent in Britain. His file in Abwehr records, examined after the war by Allied intelligence officers, showed a consistent pattern of assessed success. His sabotage of the de Havilland factory was recorded as confirmed. His reporting on V-1 impacts was recorded as accurate and used to adjust targeting. His communications were assessed as reliable and his security as intact. Every assessment was wrong. Every success was staged. Every piece of information he had provided had been controlled by British intelligence. The Germans gave him the Iron Cross. After the war, Chapman's story remained classified for decades. He wrote a memoir that was suppressed by the British government. He spoke publicly about his wartime activities in limited ways. He lived an eventful post-war life that retained the specific quality of unpredictability that had characterized everything before it. He died in 1997, at the age of 83. His MI5 handler Ronnie Reed, assessing Chapman's contribution after the war, wrote a report that summarized what Zigzag had accomplished. The report is not public in full. The portions that have been released describe Chapman in terms that MI5 officer reports rarely use about human beings. Reed wrote that Chapman was, despite everything that made him unreliable in the conventional sense, genuinely brave. That the operation had required him to maintain his deception under conditions where exposure would have meant death. That he had done so without the training or the institutional support that professional agents received. That he had done it essentially on his own, relying on the intelligence and the nerve and the specific quality of a man who had spent his life reading situations and acting on his reading. Reed also wrote, in a line that has been quoted in every account of Chapman's career since the file was partially released, that Agent Zigzag was the most remarkable person he had ever encountered in the intelligence world. The most remarkable person. In the assessment of a man who worked for MI5 during the most intensive period of intelligence operations in the history of British intelligence. A safecracker from County Durham, who jumped out of a German aircraft over England in December 1942 and walked to the nearest police station, and won the Iron Cross for it.